What are CB McDonald's template holes, often called ideal holes? Where did they come from? And why do they seem so important to understanding golf architecture? That's what I'm talking about today with PJ Clark in this installment of our Golf Architecture 101 series. I'm Garrett Morrison, and this is Designing Golf. All right, PJ, how's it going?
I'm doing good. I'm excited for this one. This was by my own request, so I'm really fired up here.
Yes, we'll talk about why you requested it because I'm curious. But it's good to have class back in session. It's been a while since we've done one of these.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited, and this is probably the number one topic I would assume I needed to learn based on what we do here and when we started this. So I'm happy to be here.
That's interesting. So hopefully I'll inform you in the ways that you want to be informed. But I guess you've heard plenty of references to CB McDonald and Seth Raynor and their template holes, and our goal here is to kind of demystify that. First, though, I want to quickly clarify something that we covered in our last Golf Architecture 101 episode. And that was the topic of the episode was Alistair Mackenzie's 13 essential features of an ideal golf course, or his 13 principles. The confusion in that podcast, I think, came with principle number 6, the principle that said there should be a minimum of blindness for approach shots. Now, what Mackenzie means here is that there should not be many blind approach shots. I believe you thought he was saying that approach shots should be at the minimum blind.
Yes, that is exactly how I read that.
I did not pick up on this during the podcast. I was failing in my job as a teacher. I wasn't listening properly. And so I was just kind of proceeding with my understanding of it without really noticing that you had interpreted it differently.
So now I'm pro number 6 instead of very anti number 6. I want to make that clear for everybody. Now that I've learned the flip side.
That was a whoops. These things happen. These things, I mean, geez, looking back on my teaching career, the things that I would just like give lectures on and then discover afterwards that my students had some basic misunderstanding that rendered my entire lecture irrelevant. That happened over and over again. And this is an example of that. Very understandable that you would interpret the text in that way. Really, like when I looked at it, I was like, oh yeah, I can totally see how he got there. And I should have clarified that Mackenzie meant not many blind approach shots, please.
So
he did not like courses.
This is why he's the doctor. He knows something about something. I should have realized that if I was so confused that it was me who was wrong and not the doctor. No, that makes sense.
That's right. Trust the doctor.
Yeah,
blindly.
That makes sense.
It would have, if we had read more of Mackenzie's writing than just the 13 principles, I think it would have been clearer, because elsewhere he kind of elaborates on this principle and talks about why he doesn't want many blind approach shots and all that kind of stuff. It was just more common in Mackenzie's day that approach shots would be blind because, of course, earth moving equipment wasn't what it is today. And so they kind of dealt with the lay of the land.
That makes sense. That I could see how, if you're just dealt a hand on the side of a hill, then it's kind of what you have to work with there.
Now, the funny thing is blind approach shots have come back into fashion. I mean, it's a feature of ancient architecture that people now find charming because it's somewhat rare. Blind approach shots really fell out of fashion in the middle of the 20th century. And so because they became rare, I think people have started to gain a kind of affection for them. But in any case, I just wanted to wrap that up. And then we got a couple of comments and I was like, I missed this one. Sorry. So let's get to our topic for the day. Charles Blair Macdonald's. That would be maybe a more Scottish version.
Yeah.
Okay, who knows? Maybe there is a Charles Blair Macdonald out there. His ideal holes or template holes. And this is, I think, actually very related to our discussion of Mackenzie's 13 principles. And that's because Mackenzie and McDonald were essentially asking the same question. How do you design the ideal golf course? Mackenzie's answer to that question was this list of principles. McDonald's answer was his notion of ideal holes. So The ideal holes are hole designs or concepts that you see used over and over on the courses of CB McDonald and his collaborator / protege, Seth Raynor. McDonald and or Raynor, sometimes together, right? They collaborated a lot, but sometimes just Raynor as a solo architect. They were responsible for many of the best regarded golf courses built during the golden age of golf architecture in America, which stretched from approximately 1910 to the late 1930s. McDonald's best known designs include National Golf Links of America, the Lido, Piping Rock, Sleepy Hollow, the Creek, Mid-Ocean in Bermuda, and St. Louis Country Club. Seth Raynor had a much bigger portfolio, right? McDonald's body of work is fairly small. So some of Raynor's highlights would include Fisher's Island, Chicago Golf Club, Shore Acres, Camargo, Yeamans Hall, etc., etc. And Raynor also served as the lead associate, what we would now call the lead associate or construction manager or whatever, on all of McDonald's major projects. A distinctive feature of McDonald and Raynor's courses is the presence of the so-called template holes, these particular design concepts, usually based on models from famous British links courses and adapted to whatever piece of ground McDonald and Raynor were working with. Some of the better-known template holes include the Redan, the Road Hole, the Eden, the Cape, the Biarritz, the Short, the Alps, so on and so forth. I'm sure you've heard these referred to casually in podcasts and been like, okay, what are we talking about here?
That's exactly how we got here. Yeah.
Okay. So that's our subject for this episode. Now, we won't cover a lot of particular template holes. That may come as a disappointment, but we're mostly in an audio medium here. We'll also publish this on YouTube with some visuals. And for an audio medium, I figured that just talking about specific template holes might be a little tough because we just have to talk their features out. But what I hope we can do here is kind of establish a basis for understanding all template holes, and then we can dig into whatever particular ones you're curious about. Now, as you mentioned, PJ, you actually requested that we talk about this subject. Why were you interested in it?
I feel like it comes up a lot, just in random podcasts here or there, or we did the Raynor Man merch collection, and Cameron was talking about how he had to draw all the template holes, and I was like, I know that's a thing I'm supposed to know at some point, but I have no idea what you're talking about. So I got to a point, I forget what entirely prompted me, but it got to a point where I was like, I have no idea what we're talking about anymore. So I needed to humbly request to get taught whatever you're about to teach me right now.
Let's go back to square one.
Yeah.
It is, it's kind of like a code language. And this is one thing that can make golf architecture an intimidating subject, is that you're dropped into it and people are speaking a different language that includes words like Redan and Eden and Short Hole and Alps. And if you don't understand the language, then it can feel a bit alienating. And hopefully that's what we're breaking down a bit here in the Golf Architecture 101 series. I want to assure you there's nothing complicated about understanding these template holes. Most of them are pretty simple to understand, and a lot of people who casually refer to them in conversation don't actually know the design concepts that they're referring.
That's good. That already makes me feel better.
Yeah.
That's great.
In order to really have mastery of the subject, then you do need to dig a little bit deeper. But in order to have just a framework for the conversation, I think we can do that pretty quickly. So let's start with some background, a little bit of history, who McDonald was, how he came up with this idea. This is actually, I love this story. This is one of my favorite stories to tell about golf architecture. I think it represents so much of what the early development of golf course design as a discipline and a field of study was. And so I just really like going through this. It's part of the reason I was excited about this episode. So CB McDonald, wealthy Chicago kid who ended up attending the University of St. Andrews in the early 1870s. St. Andrews, Scotland was and is the international home of golf. So No surprise.
Seems
CB
like a good
McDonald.
gig. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I often mention this. I wish I went to the University of St. Andrews. Speaking of being a teacher, one of my advisees when I was a high school teacher went to the University of St. Andrews, and I sat down with him before he accepted the offer of admission, and I was like, "Listen, do you play golf?" And he said, "No." And I said, "You had better learn golf.
How do
I
you
will
even
kill
end
you."
up how do you even end up in that situation? Like, what prompts you to go to the University of St. Andrews if you're not?
You know,
It's
it's a great university. Like, first of all, really, really wonderful university. If you're in Great Britain, it's like going to, I guess, an Ivy League university. So they have great academics. But I think if you go to the University of St. Andrews and don't play golf, that, oh man.
Yeah, it feels like an odd combination. Sure.
Yeah. In any case, McDonald did it right. He really learned the game while he was there. He met and played with old Tom Morris and young Tom Morris. Good time to be there in the 1870s. And he became a very capable player, ultimately one of the better players in the U.S. when he returned. So he got back to the U.S. In the mid 1870s, and he was disappointed to find that the game basically didn't exist in the country at that time. So he didn't play much golf for the next 15 years or so. And whatever golf courses appeared during this period were, in his mind, very low quality. They just didn't get anywhere close to what he saw in St. Andrews. At the time, St. Andrews was basically what it is today, a great, great golf course. You can imagine going from there to the kind of rudimentary golf courses that we had in America at the time, and it was a big difference. So when McDonald caught the golf bug again in the late 1880s, one of his primary goals became to create the first truly great American golf course. During this period, he established Chicago Golf Club, but the early versions of that course were not on the level of today's Chicago Golf Club, which was primarily designed by Seth Raynor in the 1920s. Nonetheless, Chicago Golf Club was a major early American club, and McDonald became a major figure in the development of American golf.
So is this just like, everybody makes a joke like, oh, I'm gonna go write the great American novel? Like this is somebody just decided to go build a golf course one day.
That's right. He wanted to write the great American novel. That's right. He had that ambition. Make the great American movie, make the great American album. This ambition is cross-disciplinary for sure. It goes across art forms, and this was McDonald's version of it. And so, yeah, he had this desire. There's a lot of biography here that I won't get into, but McDonald did become instrumental in the founding of the USGA and the origins of the US Open. So there's interesting stuff there too, but I'll skip forward to the golf course design story. In 1901, McDonald was reading Golf Illustrated, probably the most popular golf-only publication of the time, published in the UK. And he came across a debate in the pages of Golf Illustrated between some leading golfers of the time about what the greatest holes in the world were. And by world, I mean Great Britain. That was essentially their frame of reference and where most of the best golf courses were. So, to my knowledge, this is the first time a discussion of this type happened in print, which is really saying something because this is a very common thing now, right? People talking about the best courses and the best holes. So try to imagine a world in which this hadn't happened before.
This is kind of crazy. Just trying to, starting the take industry, for lack of a better term, from nothing.
That's right.
It's an interesting concept to think about.
God, it's fascinating to read because that's exactly it. The first hot takes about golf architecture. It's like nobody had ever done it before. And these guys, Harry Vardon, J.H. Taylor, James Braid, Willie Park Jr., John Lowe, Horace Hutchinson, these were the first, take masters.
Sitting there like, what have I done? Looking at golf course, exactly. Created.
Yeah, if they
the end of
they're looking down now.
Yeah, it's the end of Oppenheimer, just staring blankly into the camera. Yeah, it's a tough scene for those guys.
So, the golfers who participated in this debate were the heavies of the game at the time. Very impressive names. The ones that I mentioned. These were, Open Championship winners and just significant figures. And so their word carried weight, and McDonald was fascinated by what they were writing. And it turned out that a certain number of holes kind of rose to the top. It got mentioned by a lot of different people as being the best of their kind. They talked about the best 1-shotters, 2-shotters, and 3-shotters. So par 3s, par 4s, par 5s. The best 1-shotters, according to this panel, turned out to be the Eden, the 11th hole at St. Andrews. The Redan, the 15th hole at North Berwick. The Alps, the 17th hole at Prestwick. The road hole, 17 at St. Andrews. The long hole, 14 at St. Andrews. I ended up going through the 2-shotters and 3-shotters there, actually, without mentioning it. But the road hole at the time, now considered a par 4, right? It's categorized as a par 4. At the time, it was considered more of a par 5. They didn't call it a par 5, but it was thought that you would spend 3 shots in getting to that green. And so those were the holes that came up, and these remain some of the most famous holes in the UK. You know, Prestwick is on the west coast of Scotland, and that was an early old Tom Morris course. You've probably heard Andy mention North Berwick, great Scottish links course, and then of course the old course at St. Andrews, still very much on the open rota and at the top of everybody's minds. All of these holes, the ones that were mentioned in this debate, in this magazine in 1901, eventually became template holes. There were more template holes than those, but this was kind of the starting point. This was the first, body of hole designs that McDonald started working with. So this whole discussion in Golf Illustrated, it kind of prompted a brainwave for McDonald. He said to himself, surely if you build a course with 18 of these ideal holes, then you would have an ideal golf course.
Yeah, that's a guy with a good take right there. That's pretty good. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I like how his mind works. He's like, nobody's ever thought of this before,
and nobody can get mad because everybody agrees they're the best. So
that's right.
That's it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of replicate these designs, and then everybody will have to acknowledge, oh my God, you have a Redan, you have an Alps, you have a road hole.
That's that great American novel way of thinking right there. I'm just going to copy everybody else and nobody's going to get mad.
Right. I'll just borrow a character from Melville and, a little bit of prose from Fitzgerald and there you go. In any case, he spent the next decade or so researching the best holes of Great Britain. So he took multiple trips. He sent friends on trips to do research for him and to take measurements and to really nail these down. And he quickly discovered that replicating these holes with any real precision would be impossible because, of course, you would be working with a different piece of land. And many of these holes were just lay of the land holes. They were not manufactured. They derived their features from the topography. And so McDonald said, well, if I don't have this topography, then I guess I can't exactly replicate them. So ultimately, he decided to go for looser interpretations, basically extracting the strategic essence of these holes, boiling them down to their basic features, rather than copying them. And I think that it was in this process that McDonald came to understand golf course design on as deep and sophisticated a level as any architect of the Golden Age. It was when he started to try to interpret these holes and actually find out why they were great instead of just replicating them, that he became a great golf architecture mind. Because he essentially discovered for himself the strategic school of golf architecture, which we talked about in the first 101 episode. So while he was doing this, he was also searching far and wide for a piece of land for his great American golf course. He looked at Maine, he was looking up and down the East Coast, and he eventually settled on a piece of land right next to Shinnecock Hills Golf Club in Long Island, in PJ's domain. So eventually found his
a lot
of
people
home.
Find things in Southampton, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Find their summer house, So this would ultimately become, of course, the National Golf Links of America. which opened in 1911 and received immediate rapturous praise. People went and played this course and were blown away by it. It was like nothing else that had been created in the States at the time. It was a next level golf course in every way. That's a very surface level account of the creation of National Golf Links that I just gave. I've done a deeper dive into that history with Chris Millard, who wrote the most recent historical book on National Golf Links. This is a Fried Egg podcast episode from about 1.5 years ago called Great Courses, National Golf Links. So check that out if you want more detail. But it wasn't just the ideal holes that made National Golf Links different. It was also the construction, the agronomy, like in every way, and the amount of money that went into it. Like nothing, I don't think anything close to this amount of money had ever been spent on constructing a golf course before. He got basically the richest people on the East Coast to pitch in for his Great American Golf Course. He was a remarkable mover and shaker, Macdonald. And so National Golf Links turned out really well. And of course, it did represent the debut of Macdonald's ideal holes. The National had great renditions of the Redan, the Alps, the Road Hole, the Eden. It was all there. It was a fully formed statement of a golf course. And Macdonald meant NGLA to be his one true masterwork, right? His example for all of American golf. He didn't really intend to build other golf courses. He was kind of like, I'm done.
I mean, if you build something and it immediately gets, rapturous praise, as you said,
mm-hmm.
I could see how you want to just go out on top. I get that.
Absolutely. And, he has this in common with a lot of great artists too, who want to create their one great thing. And then it's like, okay, that's what I devoted my life to and I'm done. But it didn't really turn out that way because, of course, people kept asking him to design more golf courses for them. All of his rich friends were like, hey, this looks cool. I'd like one. And so he did design a few others, but for the most part, he passed off his commissions or his potential commissions to Seth Raynor. And Raynor was really the one who spread the idea of ideal holes broadly. Raynor became the Johnny Appleseed of this approach to golf course design and a big reason why we know template holes today. And so that's the background of the ideal holes. Before we get into some examples of templates and before we have maybe a little bit of discussion about the virtues of ideal holes as an approach to golf course design, I'd like to talk a bit about the USGA Green Section. The USGA Green Section is a supporter of the Designing Golf podcast in its early days here, so thank you so much to the Green Section. Understanding the performance of your greens has never been easier thanks to the GS3 ball from the USGA Green Section. The GS3 seamlessly connects to the Deacon management system, instantly telling you how fast, smooth, true, and firm your greens are. Now you can make data-driven decisions, better manage resources, communicate to course personnel, and most importantly, create a playing experience for your golfers like never before. To learn more, visit the USGA Green Section's shop at gsshop.usga.org. I've actually seen the GS3 ball in action. We've been doing some documentaries lately about various turf operations throughout the country. I have seen the GS3 ball in use, and it is pretty cool. So check out that offering from the USGA Green Section. All right, let's talk about a couple examples of templates, PJ. I'm going to have you put on your sort of visualizing hat right now, if we can. I know this can sometimes be tricky. For the YouTube version of this episode, we'll maybe incorporate a couple of images of these holes to help out people who consume the podcast that way. But the first one I want to talk about is the Redan. Where else would you start?
I feel like this is the number one.
Yeah.
This is the number one that gets mentioned by you guys all the time.
Yeah. Because it's a very common type of hole. It's spread like wildfire. Everybody has a Redan. So this is based on the 15th hole at North Berwick. The key elements. 1, the green is kind of oriented on a 45-degree angle, on a diagonal in relation to the tee, usually from short right to long left, right? Okay, so it's set on a diagonal where if you're a right-hander, you kind of want to work a draw into there. The green is tilted from front to back. Okay, so from the front right to the back left section, it's tilted away from the tee. A deep, often flashed up bunker guards the front left side of the green. So kind of in front of the green, sitting on that same diagonal as the green. Sometimes there's another bunker, even deeper one perhaps, guarding the back right side of the green. So if you go over, you'll end up there. Now, the original version at North Berwick has a pair of bunkers cut into a rise about 50 yards short of the green. This is, I think, actually where the name Redan came from, because Redan, and I'm sure people will correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't actually confirm this before I came on the podcast, but Redan, I believe, is a term for a military fortification.
Okay.
And my sense is that this feature at North Berwick, this like kind of dune-like rise that these bunkers are cut into 50 yards short of the green, kind of blocking the view of the green to an extent, is where that idea of a fortification came from and where the notion of a Redan came from. But Macdonald and Raynor's Redans often did not have this feature. Sometimes they did, often they didn't, because again, it would require some topography to do that. You would need a rise.
Yeah.
So the essential elements of a modern Redan tend to be that orientation of the green on a diagonal and the fact that it runs front to back.
Okay.
And that often there's like a kicker slope, what's called a kicker slope, a little kind of backboard at the front right portion of the green where you can hit your ball into it and it kind of deflects the ball,
kind of
filters it back to the back left portion of the green. So it's like a ramp, right? I think this hole is at its most strategically interesting when the pin is in the back. And that's because
that makes sense. Yeah.
You can choose between going straight at the pin over that big bunker in front of the green, or you can play it along the ground through the opening to the green on the right, maybe kind of sling a low draw in there, go through the opening to the green and let the ball release along that downslope, the front to back slope, back to the pin. That's the kind of clever way to play the hole. You don't have to make the big carry, and you can kind of work it around. So you have options here, right? Which is the soul of strategic golf, options and the attendant risks and rewards. So the reason you've heard this term is that this is like the most replicated par 3 design in the history of golf. It is often done poorly or just partially, right? The most commonly missing feature is that front to back slope, because people don't usually like building holes where the green runs away from the player. But the problem is when you don't have that, you kind of lose the ability to work the ball to a back pin through that kind of clever low running shot that I talked about. And so often people will just refer to any hole with a diagonally set green as a Redan. But personally, I don't think it's a Redan at all unless you have that element of a kicker slope and a front to back slope to get the ball to a back pin through other methods than just going straight at it. I think if you don't have that, you really don't have a Redan. Reverse Redans became common as well. When people say reverse Redan, they just mean the exact same design, but the green is set on a diagonal that would seem to accept a fade from a right-handed player. This maybe isn't as common because when, most people are right-handed, not to disrespect the lefties out there. Sorry that Redans aren't as fun for you. But when you're hitting a fade, your ball stops quicker if you're a right-hander. And if you're a left-hander, but your fade goes the other direction. Right-hander hitting a draw to a traditional Redan, the ball's going to have less spin and it's going to have that element of being able to run along the ground. And that's why right to left Redans are more common. Does that all make sense? Were you able to visualize that? Stay with me. Any questions?
Yeah. So I think it makes sense. I'm now trying to because it's pretty common, think of holes that I might have seen at some point that would fit this. I think, I mean, it definitely makes sense. And I actually appreciate the idea of, I get why maybe a modern day architect, if you're building a hole like now with the, incessant need for a hole in one, or give people a chance, that you want to have people see it roll in back towards you versus a feeder pin away. But I like the idea of the feeder pin away and having it kind of slope downward. To me, as a player, I feel like that would be more fun than having it run further and kind of work the ball versus just, hit it straight up in the air and have it roll back down towards you, kind of thing.
That's where the fun comes from. Seeing the ball go along the ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most fun thing to do in golf, and the most fun thing to watch in golf is what the ball does after it hits the ground. And when you have a green going away from you, it behaves a lot like firmness because it accelerates the ball as it goes along the ground. And you really have to consider what to do. Are you going to try to stop it? Or are you going to just accept that the slope is going to do what it does to your ball and use that? And that's the central question of a proper Redan. Now, you'll see a lot of, as I said before, diagonally set greens out there in the world of golf, and somebody might refer to them as a Redan, but it's not really, unless you can work the ball along the ground. I recommend that you don't correct people when they not that you would do this. It's not really your personality.
No, I feel like I'd just nod along and
yeah,
continue.
right.
But in my head, when I get up to that green, I'm gonna be like, "Oh, there's no slope here."
Yeah,
Can't count it. Doesn't count.
Doesn't not going to check that off my list. Yeah, so really, like, true Redans are a little more rare than people think. Diagonal greens with a bunker in front, you'll see that all the time. But a real Redan with like a kicker slope and the ability to work the ball in that way, that's fairly rare because, front to back sloping greens are fairly rare these days. Okay, so that's the Redan template. That's all. That was
very helpful. I feel like I needed that one. If I was leaving here with something, I think I've checked that box.
That was an essential. I'll talk to you about one other, and then if there's another one that you want to talk about, we can kind of improvise that as well. Mm-hmm. But the next one I want to talk to you about is the Alps.
Okay.
I like this name, first of all. This is based on the 17th hole at Prestwick. This is not a course that people are super familiar with these days, unless they've actually played it, because it's not a course that shows up on TV. But this was the original Open Championship course. Okay. Back when the Open was 36 holes, Prestwick was 12 holes, and they would play the course three times.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the Open. Well, eventually Prestwick got expanded to 18 holes, and the Alps became the 17th hole on that course, but some version of the Alps was always there on the course. The key element of this hole, and I know this is going to challenge you because of what we've discussed with regard to blind holes. There's a huge dune directly in front of the green.
Great.
And then typically there's a bunker between the bottom of the far side of that dune and the green. So you not only are hitting over a dune to get to the green, but there's a bunker on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to get over, you got to really make the carry. This is, this is not what I'd call the strategic school of golf architecture. This is pretty penal, at least in its original essence. Just this feature of the hole is fairly penal because you got to make a big aerial carry. The fun of it is hitting your shot and then getting up and seeing the result. If you have a fun attitude about it, then you're like, all right, am I in the bunker? Am I in the dune? Am I on the green? You never know until you get there. So completely blind approach, and often the green will be sitting in a hollow, a kind of punch bowl, often what we refer to as a punch. You may hear that term a lot too, a punch bowl green. Mm-hmm. This is an example of, it's not always a pure punch bowl green, but it's sitting in a hollow there. And so that means if you get over the dune and get over the bunker, then the green is kind of friendly to you. Mm-hmm. Because if you're on the right side of it, well, it's going to slope down to the middle. If you're on the left side, it's going to slope down to the middle. If you're long, you just don't want to be short. And so if you make the carry, then your ball is probably going to end up close to the hole. The key wrinkle that Macdonald and Raynor introduced to many of their versions that I think is brilliant is that they would have this dune or this rise in front of the green. They would have the kind of low set green in a hollow, but then they would offer you an option from the tee to get a view of the green, potentially. If you hit a long, risky drive up a particular side of the hole, then from that position, you might be able to see around the dune to the green. If you hit your tee shot especially well and positioned it, perhaps there are some bunkers guarding this position in the fairway. But if you take that risk...
Now we're back to angles. Angles is going to be a whole different episode, but now we're back to angles.
We're back to angles.
Okay, I get it.
This angle is vision related, because if you take the risk, then you can see the green on your approach. And that's nice, because the whole thing about that blind approach is that it's uncomfortable. Yeah. You don't know maybe where to aim. You don't really have a true intuitive sense of how far to hit your ball. But Macdonald and Raynor, in their versions of the Alps, often did give you this option to see the green if you took a risk. So that's the Alps hole. Reactions to that?
I like the idea of the punch bowl green. Mm-hmm. I think I was going to add, that was one of my follow-up questions. So that a punch bowl is not a template, or is a template, or is that just like a design characteristic rather?
It's a good question. I think I would consider it. Yeah, it's sort of in between.
Okay.
There are certain templates, so-called templates, that are just green designs. Mm-hmm. And those would include maybe the double plateau hole. Really what the double plateau is a green with two plateaus and then a channel between them and then a lower section, like a 3-section green where you have these 2 high sections where you can put pins and then one low section where you can put a pin and then a little trough between the plateaus. That's a double plateau green. But it's not really specific as to what the other features of the hole would be. Often a double plateau green is paired with a principal's nose bunker complex, which is based on a bunker complex on the 16th hole at St. Andrews, where you have kind of a couple of bunkers cut into a small mound or dune.
Okay.
And if you look at it from above, it looks like a nose. With 2 nostrils, right? The bunkers are the 2 nostrils. It's kind of silly, but you don't really see it that way from the ground. If you look at it from the air, then, in any case, so some of these motifs, like the double plateau green and the principal's nose bunker complex, are kind of free floating. So it's not like a whole integrated hole design. And I guess I would consider the punch bowl one of those. But there are holes on courses designed by Macdonald and Raynor with the name punch bowl. And so it can get a little bit confusing that way. I think the best way to understand templates, though, is that they're not always strict. Mm. The par 3 templates, the typical par 3 templates, the Redan, the Biarritz, the short hole, and the Eden hole, you'll see those over and over and over in kind of similar configurations. The topography will be different and the lengths will be different.
You can't really do a lot on a par 3, right? It is what it is. Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas on the par 4s and par 5s, often elements will be remixed, rearranged. Different things will be used in different places. And so I think I would consider the term punch bowl to be part of that network of motifs that are sometimes used in some places and sometimes in other places.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, back to the template itself. Then I like the idea of the reward of carrying this dune. You get a feeder green. That makes sense to me in my binary yes or no, ones and zeros. If I carry this, I deserve to be rewarded.
Beep,
and then
beep.
I like the idea of taking an angle and getting to see past the bunker. So I think I'm visualizing it correctly, and I like the idea of it on paper a lot.
Okay, that's good. But you're uncomfortable with blind approach shots.
Yeah,
which is understandable.
Yeah, no, I think I would be infuriated, like, standing in the fairway looking at it. But if
Yeah.
you told me, like, hey, all you have to do is hit this number and it's going to feed down, I'd be like, oh, okay, at least I'll try that. Like that makes sense. I deserve to
Mhm.
be rewarded in some circumstance there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you would be frustrated by the maiden hole, which was a hole at Royal St. George's,
Mhm.
where it was a par 3, but basically an Alps hole, because you are standing on the tee and just hitting over a dune to a semi kind of punch bowl green on the other side. That was the maiden hole. Now, confusingly enough, Macdonald and Raynor developed on some of their courses a maiden template
Okay.
that didn't really have anything it was more of a green design than a replica of the St. George's maiden hole. And so that kind of introduces a key idea of Raynor and Macdonald's templates, that sometimes the ideal holes are based on models that are either unknown or are so different from what Macdonald and Raynor ended up creating that it's hard to see the connection.
Identifiable. Yeah.
So when people talk about template holes, it's really not a strict one-to-one relationship between the model and what ultimately got built on many of Macdonald and Raynor's courses. Sometimes there was some real reinterpretation going on, and sometimes there was just a complete departure from the original model, and you just it's a mystery what was going through their minds, and nobody really knows how they came up with what they came up with. And so there was a lot of creativity in this process of developing ideal holes, and we're still coming to terms with what exactly they did. There are some unknowns here, basically. Are there any other template holes terms that you're curious to have identified?
Yeah, I have two ways I want to take this. So
Sure.
are there any other holes?
Hmm.
How does a road hole work when it's not the road hole? Because I understand what it looks like there, but how do you take that out of that context and there's no hotel and you're not, you're removing all circumstantial, outside influences.
Keep in mind, first of all, that when Macdonald first played the road hole,
yeah, sure,
there's no Old Course Hotel. Yeah, it was something different. But yes, that's a great question, because the road hole uses certain unique features of the St. Andrews cityscape to create its strategy. One of which is that little corner with, that now the Old Course Hotel, but there's always been some amount of building or human settlement there that players are kind of hitting over. And then there's the road, of course, on that backside of the green. This is an example of where Macdonald may have looked at the original version of the hole, said, clearly this needs to be one of the ideal holes because everybody agrees that it's the greatest 3-shot hole or 2-shot hole or whatever you wanted to consider it in the world. We've got to have some version of this, but we can't replicate exactly the features that it has in its landscape. And so I think what Macdonald and Raynor ended up doing in their versions was boiling the hole down to its strategic fundamentals, its angles, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about what the road hole really is, beyond just the particularities of the hotel and the road, it is a sharply doglegging right hole with an intimidating hazard on the inside of the dogleg and plenty of room to play on the outside of the dogleg. But then a green oriented from right to left along that Redan diagonal, but designed completely differently from a Redan, with a super deep, terrifying bunker embedded into that green on its left side, and then a hazard, a kind of straight line hazard on the outside, on the other side. And so the conundrum you find is that if you bail out away from the hazard on the inside of the dogleg, then you're facing an approach where you're hitting over that terrifying pop bunker and toward the road on the other side. you are going to end up either in the pop bunker or on the road, neither of which is good. And maybe you have some space to bail out on one side or the other. You could play short of the green. Some people even provocatively play long of the green on the road hole. But that is the strategic essence of the hole. Unless you challenge the inside of the dogleg, you're going to face an enormously difficult second shot. And that is what Macdonald and Raynor extracted from the road hole. So ultimately, what they did was, instead of the road, they often just put a bunker on the other side there to stand in for the road. Kind of a linear bunker, basically in the same position and in the same orientation as the road. And then maybe they'd find something else for the inside of the dogleg. Maybe some trees, maybe some water, things varied, or maybe just some bunkers to, again, stand in for that hazard that you would want to avoid on the inside of the dogleg.
So that was my follow-up question was, does it need to be like a boundary? Like, do you have to have a literal like road or out of play or whatever? Like, does this have to be pushed up against the edge of a property, or what are you throwing on that side to that end there?
You could definitely argue that in order to recreate the tension of the road hole, you need a boundary, because you really need those hazards on that outside of the green and the inside of the dogleg to be absolutely just the things that you need to avoid at all costs. So I think some people would argue that, yes, it needs to be an out of bounds kind of situation. But the fact is that if you look at Macdonald and Raynor's versions of the road hole, they usually didn't have that, because they didn't usually have a boundary line with the right dimensions to create that. So they needed to create it in another way. But yeah, I think that in general, the road hole, to my mind, this is just my opinion, is not always the most successful Macdonald and Raynor template. I think precisely because of this reason. Because usually it's not a boundary, and some of the character of the hole is lost as a result. I don't think I've ever seen a version of the road hole that exceeds the original.
Yeah.
Well, whereas some other templates, in many cases, the renditions by Macdonald and Raynor were better. And I don't think that's the case with the road hole, because the original is so good.
Yeah, I feel like it would be hard to beat that. Yeah. Actually having the road and the bunker, how you can put a penal bunker in that position, but are you getting it to be that exact bunker, and how bad that is and that slope? I feel like it's hard to replicate anywhere.
This is always the problem with influences in art, because if you're just trying to replicate something that you really love, a really great work of art, you're always going to fall a little short, because it's not the original. And even if you try to tweak or improve some elements of it, the original is going to have something about it that is just better. And so in order to exceed your influences or be as great as your influences, you need to transform them in the process of making new art. And I think that's why the Macdonald and Raynor templates that are really different from their models tend to be the better ones.
So that's kind of the second half of my two ways that I wanted to take this. I wanted to figure out what the road hole was when you remove all context of the actual road hole. Now, my question to you is, do you think, in your opinion, however you want to take this, like, are the template holes good? Like,
this was a question I had for you as well.
Obviously they are, to some extent, that they're still being used 120 years after this all started. But like, would you prefer to have these continually be used into the future, or is it time to kind of move on and figure out something new?
Wonderful question. Let me throw it back at you briefly before I give my thoughts on it. Do you think the template holes are unoriginal? That's the first question. Do you think their lack of originality is a problem?
I don't think it's a problem, because like you said, like, you're never getting the same land, and it's not going to be kind of cookie cutter. Like, every single time you build it is going to be the exact same thing. I like having aspects of recurring motifs, like you said, throughout an architect's kind of portfolio. I think that makes sense. That's kind of like any kind of art, that you're going to have kind of recurring themes or identifiable characteristics. But, I think, especially when you're talking about the, amount of land that now some of these courses are taking up, like if you have the opportunity to get creative, I wouldn't necessarily be against that either.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you've thought through that really well. For me, what you said at the beginning, that the land differentiates template holes from each other, is the key thing to understand about Macdonald and Raynor's own courses. I think when you look at these courses from a Google Earth view, you might say, well, they're just doing the same holes over and over again. Mm-hmm. But when you play them, that kind of flies out of your mind because each Macdonald and Raynor course, especially their best ones, especially National Golf Links or the Lido as recreated in Sand Valley, or Raynor's best courses like the course at Yale or Yeaman's Hall or Chicago Golf Club. When you actually play these courses, they feel so specific and original to their piece of land. I think especially Raynor's genius, because he designed so many more courses than Macdonald, but Raynor's genius was finding different ways to adapt these template ideas to different pieces of land. Is really an interesting exercise. And he managed to come up with courses that just feel totally original time after time, totally unique. And that was something that goes beyond just theorizing the ideal holes. It drew on the skills of routing and, just finding opportunities in the land that were field skills. They were on the ground skills that Macdonald and Raynor had in doing this. So their genius goes way, way beyond just coming up with the ideal holes. Now, I think it's true that occasionally I wish that Raynor would have used different par 3 ideas, because that's really where this kind of starts to become a bit repetitive. And whenever Raynor incorporates a new kind of par 3 into his set of par 3s on a particular course, I get really excited.
Yeah, it kind of like hits you in the face, right?
It's like, whoa, yeah. I haven't seen this before. That's where it becomes exciting. And also something to bear in mind is that on every Macdonald and Raynor course, there are holes that they didn't replicate elsewhere. Mm-hmm. It's not 100% template holes on any Macdonald and Raynor course. There are always kind of one of one holes. And sometimes it's those ones that really jump out at you for a variety of reasons. And maybe that does indicate a new direction for golf architecture after Macdonald and Raynor, that pursuing these original ideas, moving beyond the templates, was the way to go. At the same time, I do appreciate the way that the ideal holes were adapted to each landscape of each course, and I don't necessarily wish that they did things differently. Now, I think it's a separate question. Should modern architects use template holes? What's your thought about that?
I think there's probably a line, a really fickle line between use and overuse. I wouldn't say don't do it, but I would caution against overdoing it. I don't know exactly where that line is. Like you said, like the Redan comes up a lot. Mm-hmm. If you want to do one of those, like, cool, but maybe don't like put all of them out there. You know what I mean?
Right. And there are some modern courses that use all template holes. Old Macdonald at Bandon Dunes is an example. And Gil Hance recently did one in Florida called Kinsale. And these courses are good. Old Macdonald, I love. But what Old Macdonald did is that it took the template holes and did something new with them. Mm-hmm. That course doesn't look like a Macdonald and Raynor course. The aesthetics are totally different. The way the bunkers and greens are built is totally different. It looks much more like St. Andrews than it does like National Golf Links. And that was the new idea that Tom Doak introduced. So in my opinion, I'm with you. Don't overdo it, first of all, because they've already been done really well. And if you're going to do it, find a new spin. Find a new slant.
Find a new slant. These
Yeah.
are perfectly normal collars. Find a new slant.
Perfectly normal template holes. Yeah. Find your new slant and do it in that way. But to an extent, the purpose of Macdonald and Raynor's template holes has gone, because their original purpose was to introduce great design ideas to America. They did that.
Yeah.
And now that they've done that, I guess it's time for us all to move on. And then besides that, another question that's raised by Macdonald and Raynor's project here, recreating the ideal holes, a bigger question about the entire idea of it is whether a course with the 18 best holes is necessarily the best golf course. That was Macdonald's theory at the beginning. If I create 18 ideal holes, I will have the ideal golf course. For a variety of reasons, I don't think I agree.
No, I feel like you need what's making the holes great. I've never been to St. Andrews, but I think part of what makes the road hole great, for example, is the context of it and having it be, late in the round, where it's positioned in the routing, having the road, having the now hotel, like all of that is what makes the hole legendary. And if you remove literally all of that, then it's just like a nice golf hole.
I think you're exactly right. The wonder of St. Andrews is the journey out to the estuary and back to town. That's what's so great about, that's one of the things that's so great about that golf course. That accounts for a lot of its emotional impact on players, that you kind of go on an adventure away from town, and then for the last several holes, the town gets bigger and bigger in your frame of view until you're finally right in it. And part of the magic of the road hole is that it directly engages with the town. The town is like part of that.
Yeah, the town is the hole. Yeah,
that's right. And this is what you've been building toward throughout the whole round. You went away from it. Now you're coming back to it. And so that is a big part of why the road hole is so cool. And when you take it out of context and you make it the fourth hole on a golf course, and you don't have those elements of the town there, then what you have is the strategy, which is really cool, but it is different. And that's why responding to the particular piece of land that you have in designing a golf course is probably always the best method. Now, if you don't have anything in that piece of land that's interesting, then you can consider what to do from there. But if you have a piece of land with great features in it, then the first job is to use those features well. And that's what the old course does. And by the way, that's what so many of Macdonald and Raynor's best courses do as well. In addition to having these template holes, they also use the land extremely well. They don't miss any opportunities. Does that make you feel more comfortable with the template holes now, PJ? There are many more specific instances to talk about, but I hope that that's gotten you to a point where at least the discussion as a whole makes sense.
Yeah, well, I wanted to leave here with knowing what a Redan was. I think I'm hammered. I got that one locked down. So mission accomplished. All of this other historical context is great gravy, but I'm leaving here with something.
I love it, PJ. Always a pleasure to talk to you about Golf Architecture 101. We'll do it again soon. And please let me know if there's another topic that you want to dig into.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it. But I don't know. Give me a couple weeks of hearing you guys talk about something, and something will pop into my brain, I'm sure.
Exactly. This episode of Designing Golf was produced by our guest, PJ Clark. Thank you, PJ, for everything you do online. Now, if you've been enjoying Designing Golf, leave us a rating and a review wherever you happen to be listening to us. We like to hear feedback. And also consider joining Fried Egg Golf Club, recently renamed as we relaunched our website. We're building a great community in there where we talk about things like Redans. And so if you like talking about that kind of stuff, then come join us in Fried Egg Golf Club. Go to thefriedegg.com/membership. enjoy our upcoming golf here. We just finished the PGA Championship and the US Open is quickly approaching. So we're going to do some fun things on designing golf that are related to the major championship venues. So make sure to stick with us for that. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back again soon with another episode.